The wagon wheels groaned like dying cattle as Willa Jenkins stood in the blazing afternoon sun outside the saloon in St. Louis, Missouri. Her hands bound with rough rope that bit into her wrists while her stepfather negotiated her sale like she was nothing more than livestock. It was June of 1876, and the Mississippi River humidity clung to everything like a second skin as men with hard faces and harder eyes circled around her, calculating her worth in dollars and cents while her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. "She's young, healthy, can cook and clean," her stepfather Raymond was saying, his tobacco-stained teeth showing in what he probably thought was a winning smile. "Strong back on her, too. Worth every penny of what I'm asking." Willa kept her eyes fixed on the dusty street, refusing to look at any of the men who had gathered. She had known this day was coming ever since her mother died of fever 3 months ago, leaving her alone with a man who saw her as nothing but a burden and an opportunity. Raymond had gambled away everything her real father had left them, drunk himself into debt, and now here she stood, 21 years old and being sold to the highest bidder. "I'll give you $50, said a man with a beer belly and breath that reeked even from 6 feet away. "75, another countered, this one with cruel eyes that made Willa's skin crawl. Raymond rubbed his hands together greedily. "Now we're talking sense. Any other offers? This is disgusting." The voice cut through the auction like a knife through butter, sharp and clear and righteous with anger. "You cannot sell a human being. This is 1876, not the Dark Ages." Willa's head snapped up, and she saw him for the first time. He was tall, probably around 24 or 25, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn cattleman's hat. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his blue eyes blazed with an intensity that made something flutter in her chest, despite the circumstances. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty from the trail, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. "Mind your own business, stranger," Raymond snarled. "This here's a private transaction." "Private?" The cowboy stepped closer, and Willa could see the controlled fury in every movement. "You're conducting it in the middle of the street, and I'm making it my business." "Slavery was abolished over a decade ago." "She's not a slave, she's indentured," Raymond said quickly, though his eyes darted nervously. "Paying off family debts." "Is that true, miss?" The cowboy's gaze found Willa's, and she saw something in his eyes she had not seen in a long time. Genuine concern, respect, like she was a person who mattered. "I don't owe him anything," Willa said, her voice stronger than she felt. "He gambled away my mother's inheritance, and now he's trying to sell me to cover his losses." The cowboy's expression darkened further. "Then there's no debt." "Let her go. You want her, you pay for her," Raymond shot back. "Otherwise, keep walking." For a long moment, the cowboy just stared at him, and Willa saw his hand flex near his gun. Then something changed in his face, some calculation running behind those sharp blue eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch, counting out bills with deliberate slowness. $100, he said flatly. "But understand this clearly. I'm not buying her. I'm buying her freedom from you. Once this money changes hands, you ride out of St. Louis and you never come near her again. You break that agreement and I'll hunt you down myself. Do we have an understanding?" Raymond's eyes went wide at the sight of so much money. He snatched the bills from the cowboy's hand faster than a rattlesnake strike. "Deal's a deal. She's all yours." He did not even look at Willa as he turned and hurried into the saloon, probably to spend his blood money on whiskey and cards. The crowd dispersed, disappointed there would be no more entertainment. The cowboy stepped up to Willa and pulled a knife from his belt. She flinched instinctively, but he just held up his free hand in a calming gesture. Easy now. Just cutting those ropes, they look like they hurt. He sliced through the bindings with a few quick motions, and Willa felt the circulation rush back into her hands with painful pins and needles. She rubbed her wrists, staring at this stranger who had just paid a small fortune for her freedom. "Thank you," she managed, though the words felt inadequate. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "You're not property, you're my partner now, if you want to be, that is. I own a ranch about 2 days' ride west of here. I could use help running it if you're willing to work. You'd get room, board, and a fair wage. When you've saved enough, you can go wherever you want, or you can stay. Your choice." Willa blinked at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You spent $100 just to offer me a job." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I spent $100 because what was happening here was wrong. The job offer is separate, but I meant what I said. I need help at the ranch and you need a place to land on your feet. Seems like it could work out for both of us." "I don't even know your name." He held out his hand. "Fletcher Garrison. Most people call me Fletch." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of hard work and the strength in his grip. "Willa Jenkins." "Well, Willa Jenkins, what do you say? You want to take a chance on ranch life?" She looked back at the saloon where her stepfather had disappeared, then at the street where she had just been auctioned off like cattle. She had no money, no family, and no prospects. But she also had no chains anymore, and this man with kind eyes and an honest face was offering her something she had thought was lost forever, a choice. "Yes," she said, "I'll come with you." Fletcher's smile widened. "Good. First thing we should do is get you some proper riding clothes and supplies. Then we'll get some food in you. You look like you haven't eaten in days." "I haven't," Willa admitted. "Raymond said it was a waste of money to feed property." Fletcher's jaw clenched again, but he just nodded. "Well, you're not property anymore. Come on." He led her down the street to a general store, and Willa felt strange walking beside him, free to move without ropes, without anyone's permission. Inside, Fletcher spoke with the shopkeeper, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Chen, who clucked sympathetically when she heard Willa needed outfitting. "You poor dear. Let me find you some proper things." An hour later, Willa emerged wearing practical canvas trousers, a cotton shirt, a leather vest, and sturdy boots. She also had a small pack with spare clothes, a bedroll, and other necessities. Fletcher paid for everything without complaint, and Willa kept a mental tally of exactly how much she owed him, even if he said she did not. They ate at a small restaurant, and Willa tried not to devour her food like a starving animal, though that was exactly how she felt. Fletcher ate steadily across from her, occasionally glancing up to make sure she was all right. "Tell me about your ranch," Willa said between bites, trying to fill the silence. "It's not fancy," Fletcher said. "About 300 acres near the Merrimack River. I run cattle mostly with some horses. Had it for about 3 years now. Built the house and barn myself." "Do you have family there?" Something flickered across his face. "No, my parents died when I was 18. Cholera outbreak. I worked other people's ranches until I had enough saved to buy my own land. It's been just me since then." "That must be lonely," he shrugged. "Sometimes. But the work keeps me busy, and I prefer my own company to bad company." "Is that why you helped me? Because you understand being alone?" Fletcher set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I helped you because what was happening was wrong. Because I've spent my whole life watching people treat each other like they don't matter, and I'm tired of it. Because you deserved better." He paused. "And maybe because I do understand what it's like to have no one in your corner, so I figured I'd be in yours." Willa felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back rapidly. "You're a good man, Fletcher Garrison. "I'm just a man trying to do right," he said quietly. "Doesn't always happen, but I try." They finished their meal and Fletcher secured rooms at a boarding house for the night. Separate rooms, which Willa appreciated. He was being a perfect gentleman and it made her trust him more. The next morning they set out early. Fletcher had 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper that he rode, and a gentler mare named Daisy that he had Willa ride. The horses had been stabled overnight at the edge of town. "You know how to ride?" Fletcher asked as he adjusted Daisy's stirrups for Willa's shorter legs. "Some. My father taught me before he died. That was 10 years ago. It'll come back to you. Daisy's got a smooth gait. She'll take care of you." He was right. Once they were on the trail heading west out of St. Louis, Willa found her rhythm. The morning was already hot, typical for Missouri in June, but there was a breeze that made it bearable. They followed a well-worn trail through rolling hills covered in oak and hickory forests. Fletcher was an easy companion. He did not talk much, but when he did, it was interesting. He pointed out landmarks, told her about the wildlife, explained which plants were useful for medicine or cooking. Willa found herself relaxing for the first time in months, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders as St. Louis fell farther behind. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the provisions Fletcher had packed. Sitting in the shade of a massive oak tree, Willa watched him tend to the horses with gentle, competent hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why aren't you married? You seem like you'd be a good husband." Fletcher smiled slightly. "Just never found the right woman, I guess. Ranch life is hard, and most women I've met want something easier. Can't say I blame them. Some women like hard work. You one of them? I don't mind it. Working gives you purpose. It's better than sitting around feeling useless." "I suspect you and I are going to get along just fine," Fletcher said. They rode until evening, covering about 40 miles before Fletcher called a halt. They made camp near a creek, and Fletcher showed Willa how to properly hobble the horses so they could graze without wandering off. He started a fire while she filled canteens from the creek, and they cooked salt pork and beans for dinner. As the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, Willa sat by the fire and felt something unfamiliar: contentment. Just 24 hours ago she had been bound and terrified, and now she was free under the open sky with a man who had shown her nothing but kindness. "Fletcher," she said softly. "Yeah, thank you for everything." He looked at her across the flames, his face half in shadow. "You're welcome. Get some rest. Tomorrow's another long ride." She lay in her bedroll, listening to the creek babble and the horses move nearby, and fell asleep faster than she had in months. The next day followed a similar pattern. They rose with the sun, ate a quick breakfast, and rode west. The terrain gradually shifted from thick forests to more open prairie dotted with copses of trees. Fletcher pointed out his boundary markers in the late afternoon of the second day. "We're on my land now," he said with unmistakable pride in his voice. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill. It was modest but well maintained. A sturdy log house with a covered porch, a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and Willa could see the silver ribbon of the Merrimack River in the distance. "It's beautiful," Willa said honestly. "It's home," Fletcher replied. He showed her to the house first. Inside was neat and functional, if a bit sparse in decoration. The main room had a fireplace, a table with chairs, and a worn but comfortable-looking sofa. A small kitchen area occupied one corner. There were 2 bedrooms, one of which Fletcher had clearly been using. "You can have the other bedroom," he said. "I'll help you get it set up properly." The room he showed her was empty except for a bed frame. Together, they brought in a mattress from one of the outbuildings, along with a chest of drawers and a small table. Willa unpacked her few belongings, and just having a room of her own felt like an incredible luxury. Over the next few weeks, Willa settled into ranch life. Fletcher had not been exaggerating when he said he needed help. There was always work to be done: feeding animals, mending fences, tending the vegetable garden behind the house, cooking meals, cleaning tack, and 100 other tasks. Willa threw herself into it all, determined to prove her worth. Fletcher was a patient teacher. He showed her how to properly care for the horses, how to identify sick cattle, how to read weather signs and predict rain. He taught her to shoot, spending an afternoon with tin cans on fence posts until she could consistently hit her target. "Out here, you need to know how to protect yourself," he explained. "From animals, from bad men, from whatever might come. I won't always be around." "Where would you be?" Willa asked. "Sometimes I have to drive cattle to market or go into town for supplies. Could be gone for days." "You need to be able to handle things on your own." Willa appreciated that he trusted her with that responsibility. In fact, she appreciated everything about Fletcher. He was steady and reliable, treating her as an equal partner, just like he had promised. He listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and split the work fairly. When she suggested a more efficient way to organize the barn, he immediately implemented it. When she proposed planting additional vegetables, he helped her clear and prepare the ground. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and eating together in the evenings. Fletcher was not much of a talker, but Willa found she did not mind the quiet. There was something peaceful about sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set while the cicadas sang. But as the weeks turned into months, Willa became increasingly aware of something else. She was developing feelings for Fletcher. It had started small, just a flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, a warmth when their hands accidentally brushed. But it grew stronger every day. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, rare as that was. The way he was always gentlemanly but never condescending. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with something soft and wondering in his expression. The way he always saved the best portion of meat for her at dinner. The way he had given her his jacket one cool evening without a word, just draped it over her shoulders and gone back to fixing a bridle. By September, Willa was head over heels in love with Fletcher Garrison, and she had no idea if he felt the same way. One evening, they were bringing the horses in from the pasture when a storm rolled in fast, the way they sometimes did on the prairie. The sky went dark green and the wind picked up, sending leaves and debris flying. They got the horses into the barn just as the first fat raindrops started falling. "That's going to be a big one," Fletcher said, looking at the sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer. They secured the barn and ran for the house, but the rain came faster than expected. By the time they reached the porch, they were both soaked through. Inside, Willa was shivering despite the warm temperatures. "Get changed into dry clothes," Fletcher said. "I'll get a fire going." Willa changed quickly, toweled her hair as dry as she could, and returned to the main room. Fletcher had changed as well and was coaxing flames to life in the fireplace. Outside, the storm raged, lightning flashing and thunder booming loud enough to rattle the windows. "Good thing we're not in the barn," Willa said, moving closer to the fire. "That lightning sounds close." "House has a lightning rod," Fletcher said. "We're safe here." They sat together on the sofa, watching the fire and listening to the storm. It should have been frightening, but Willa felt utterly safe with Fletcher beside her. She was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders almost touching. "Can I tell you something?" Fletcher said after a long silence. "Of course." He was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When I saw you in St. Louis, standing there with your hands tied, looking so frightened but so defiant at the same time, something just hit me right here." He tapped his chest. "I couldn't walk away. Not just because it was wrong, though it was, but because I looked at you and I just knew you were meant for something better, that you were special." Willa's heart was pounding. "Fletcher, let me finish," he said softly. "These past few months, having you here, working beside you, talking with you, it's been the best time of my life. This place was just a ranch before. Now it feels like a home, and that's because of you." "It feels like home to me too," Willa whispered. Fletcher turned to look at her, and in the firelight his eyes were intense. "I know this might not be proper, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I have to tell you. I'm in love with you, Willa. I have been for a while now, and if you don't feel the same, that's all right. Nothing has to change. You still have a place here for as long as you want it, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." Joy exploded in Willa's chest. "You love me?" "Yes. More than I knew I could love anyone. Fletcher, I love you too. I've loved you since that first day, I think. Or maybe it was the second day, or the third. All I know is I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on him. "Really? Really?" He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Can I kiss you, please?" Willa breathed. Fletcher leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and then his lips met hers. The kiss was soft and sweet and perfect, full of promise and hope and love. When they finally pulled apart, Willa was breathless. "That was my first kiss," she admitted shyly. "Mine too," Fletcher confessed, and they both laughed. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder while the storm raged outside. They sat like that for a long time, just holding each other, and Willa thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been at the mercy of a cruel stepfather with no hope and no future. Now she was free in love and home. "Marry me," Fletcher said suddenly. Willa sat up and looked at him. "What? I know it's fast, but I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Marry me, Willa. Be my wife. Be my partner in everything, not just the ranch work. Let's build a life together." Tears sprang to Willa's eyes. "Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Willa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "We should do it soon," Fletcher said. "I don't want to wait. How soon?" "There's a circuit preacher who comes through the area once a month. He's due in about 2 weeks. We could get married then." 2 weeks, Willa repeated, testing the words. "That sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future, stealing kisses every few minutes like teenagers. The storm eventually passed, leaving the world washed clean and fresh. Willa went to bed that night feeling like she was floating. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Willa made herself a simple but pretty dress from fabric Fletcher bought on a trip into the nearest town. Fletcher fixed up the house, making small improvements and repairs. They told their nearest neighbors, a friendly older couple named the Hoffmans who lived about 5 miles away, and Mrs. Hoffman insisted on making a cake for the occasion. The circuit preacher, Reverend Thomas, arrived on schedule. He was a jovial man in his 50s who seemed pleased to be performing a wedding. The ceremony took place on the porch of the ranch house, with the Hoffmans as witnesses. Willa wore her new dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Fletcher wore his best clothes, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began, and Willa barely heard the rest of the ceremony. She was too focused on Fletcher, on the way he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When it came time for vows, Fletcher spoke from the heart. "Willa, I promise to love you, respect you, and treat you as my equal partner in all things. I promise to work beside you, laugh with you, and stand by you through whatever comes. You are not my property. You're my partner, my love, and my best friend. I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." Willa's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "Fletcher, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me freedom, hope, and love when I had none. I promise to build this life with you, to work beside you, to love you with everything I have. You showed me that I'm worth more than I ever believed, and I will spend my life showing you that you're worth everything to me." There was not a dry eye on the porch, including Reverend Thomas. When he pronounced them husband and wife and told Fletcher he could kiss his bride, Fletcher cupped Willa's face in his hands and kissed her so tenderly that she felt it down to her toes. They celebrated with cake and lemonade, and the Hoffmans did not leave until evening. When they were finally alone, Fletcher took Willa's hand and led her back into their house, their home. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," Fletcher explained. "The only thing I kept when she died. I want you to have it." Willa's hands trembled as he slipped it onto her finger. "It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you." He kissed her again, and this time it was different. There was passion there, hunger, need. Willa responded in kind, her arms wrapping around his neck. Fletcher swept her up into his arms and carried her to their bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them. Their wedding night was everything Willa had hoped for and more. Fletcher was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and loved. They learned each other's bodies, whispered words of love, and came together as husband and wife. Afterward, Willa lay in Fletcher's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Forever." Forever turned out to be full and rich, and sometimes challenging, but always worth it. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment as they learned to truly live together, to navigate disagreements and make decisions as a team. But they both committed to honoring their partnership, and they worked through every issue that arose. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Willa turned out to have a head for numbers and took over the accounting, finding ways to save money and increase profits. She also developed relationships with some of the local merchants, negotiating better prices for their beef and horses. Fletcher handled most of the physical labor, but increasingly relied on Willa's judgment for major decisions. In the spring of 1878, nearly 2 years after they met, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher over breakfast one morning, and his reaction was everything she hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down and apologized, worried he had been too rough. "Fletcher, I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Willa laughed. "I know, but I want to take care of you, you and the baby." "You will. You already do." He was attentive throughout her pregnancy, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her whatever she craved, reading to her in the evenings. Willa had never felt more loved or more excited. A baby, their baby, was coming, in December, with the help of Mrs. Hoffman and the local midwife. Willa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James after Fletcher's father. Fletcher cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect human they had created. "He's beautiful," Fletcher whispered. "Thank you, Willa. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Willa said, exhausted but happy. "He's ours. James was a good baby, healthy and strong." Fletcher was a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every free moment playing with his son. Watching them together made Willa's heart swell with love. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. There was less sleep and more chaos, but also more laughter and joy. The ranch continued to thrive, and Fletcher hired a young man named Pete to help with some of the heavier work, so he could spend more time with his family. When James was 2, Willa became pregnant again. This time she had a daughter, whom they named Sarah after Willa's mother. Fletcher was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, declaring her the prettiest baby in Missouri. The years passed in a blur of happiness. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere and wanted to learn everything about ranching. Sarah was quieter but equally determined, with a special gift for working with horses. Fletcher taught both children to read and write, and Willa taught them arithmetic and geography. In 1885, when James was 7 and Sarah was 5, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in the barn during a summer thunderstorm. Fletcher and Pete managed to get all the animals out, but the barn itself was destroyed. It was a devastating loss, representing years of work and significant money. Willa found Fletcher sitting on the remains of the barn's foundation the morning after the fire, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him and took his hand. "We'll rebuild," she said firmly. "It took me 3 years to build that barn the first time, and I was younger then. You're not alone this time. You have me, you have Pete, you have friends and neighbors who will help. We'll rebuild, and it will be even better than before." He looked at her, and she saw the moment hope returned to his eyes. "You're right, we can do this." And they did. The community rallied around them. The Hoffmans came with supplies. Other ranchers donated lumber and labor. Even some of the townspeople from the nearest settlement came out to help. In 6 months, they had a new barn, larger and better designed than the old one. The experience taught their children an important lesson about community and resilience, and it reminded Willa and Fletcher of how far they had come. They had built something real and lasting, not just in terms of the ranch, but in their relationships with the people around them. In 1888, Willa gave birth to their 3rd and final child, another boy they named Thomas. By this time, James was 10 and old enough to be a real help on the ranch. Sarah, at 8, had started a small business training horses for neighbors, showing her mother's head for business and her father's skill with animals. Fletcher was 40 by then, his dark hair showing threads of silver, but he was as strong and capable as ever. Willa was 33, and she looked at her life with wonder sometimes. The frightened girl who had been sold in St. Louis seemed like a different person, someone from another lifetime. One evening in the fall of 1889, after the children were asleep, Willa and Fletcher sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. "You ever think about that day in St. Louis?" Willa asked. "Sometimes," Fletcher admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago, a whole different life." She took his hand. "Do you ever regret it, spending that $100, taking me in, changing your whole life?" Fletcher turned to her with such love in his eyes that Willa's breath caught. "Regret it? Willa, that was the best $100 I ever spent. No, that's not right. It was the best decision I ever made. You and our children, this life we've built together, it's more than I ever dreamed I could have." "I feel the same way. You saved me, Fletcher." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to really live." They kissed, sweet and familiar, and Willa thought about how lucky she was. How a moment of horror had led to a lifetime of love. How the worst day of her life had turned into the first day of her real life. The years continued to pass. James grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility at the ranch until he was Fletcher's true partner in running it. Sarah married a good man from town, a veterinarian named Dr. Carson, and they settled nearby so she could stay close to her family. Young Thomas showed an interest in law, and Fletcher and Willa saved money to send him to school in St. Louis, proud that their son would have opportunities they never had. In 1895, nearly 20 years after that fateful day in St. Louis, Fletcher and Willa became grandparents when Sarah gave birth to a baby girl. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Willa felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. They were sitting on the porch one evening in 1898, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Fletcher was 60, his hair fully gray now, and Willa was 43. They had weathered droughts and storms, economic downturns and personal losses, but they had weathered it all together. "Remember what you said to me that first day?" Willa asked. "When you paid Raymond, I said a lot of things that day. You said I wasn't property, I was your partner." "Best thing I ever said," Fletcher replied, squeezing her hand. "You meant it too. You've treated me as an equal partner every single day since. Do you know how rare that is? How special? You deserve nothing less. We built something good here, Fletcher, something that will last beyond us." He looked at the ranch spread out before them, at the sturdy buildings and healthy cattle, at the house where their children had grown up and where their grandchildren now visited. But mostly he looked at Willa, the love of his life, his partner in everything. "We did," he agreed. "And it all started because I couldn't walk away from injustice, because I saw a brave woman who needed help, because I knew, somewhere deep down, that you were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours." "Destiny," Willa said softly. "Love," Fletcher corrected, "the kind that lasts forever." He was right. Their love did last forever. They had many more years together, watching their children and grandchildren grow, continuing to work the ranch they had built together, and cherishing every moment of their partnership. When Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1910, at the age of 62, Willa held his hand and whispered all the things she had told him 1,000 times before. That she loved him, that he had been the best husband and father imaginable, that he had changed her life in every way. She thanked him for seeing her as more than property, for treating her as a partner, for giving her a life full of love and purpose. Willa lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and capable until the end. She spent those years telling her grandchildren the story of how she and Fletcher met, wanting them to understand that real love meant respect and partnership, that it meant seeing the worth in another person and helping them see it in themselves. She joined Fletcher in 1915, laid to rest beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. On her headstone, her children inscribed the words Fletcher had spoken to her that first day: "Not property, but partner." It was a fitting epitaph for a woman who had started as someone's merchandise and ended as someone's beloved equal, for a love that had transformed both their lives. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each one learning the story of Fletcher and Willa, of how love and respect could build something lasting, of how one act of courage and compassion could change the course of multiple lives. In St. Louis, the spot where Willa had stood with bound hands was now a busy intersection, forgotten by history. But the ripples of what had happened there spread outward through time, touching everyone who heard the story. It became family legend, passed down with pride. The tale of a cowboy who refused to accept injustice, and a woman who reclaimed her life and found love in the process. Their story was proof that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. That one person's decision to do the right thing could change everything. That love built on mutual respect and partnership could weather any storm and last beyond even death itself. On the ranch in a small family cemetery, two headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still legible. Fletcher Garrison and Willa Garrison, husband and wife, partners in life. And if you visited on certain evenings when the light was just right, you might almost see them sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset, together forever in the place they had made home. The legacy they left was more than land or buildings or even descendants. It was the legacy of love freely given and gratefully received, of seeing worth in another human being, of building something together that was greater than either could have achieved alone. It was the legacy of a partnership forged in the most unlikely circumstances and strengthened through years of joy and hardship. Their children made sure the story was never forgotten. James, who took over the ranch, told his children about how their grandmother had been saved by their grandfather's courage and conscience. Sarah told her children about the love and respect that had defined her parents' marriage, setting an example for her own. Thomas, who became a lawyer, used his parents' story as inspiration in his work fighting for justice and equality. The ranch itself became a symbol in the community, a place where love and hard work had built something enduring. Neighbors would point it out to their children. That's the Garrison place. Fletcher Garrison bought his wife's freedom back in the old days, and they built that ranch together from nothing. The story took on an almost mythical quality over the years, but those who had known Fletcher and Willa personally always insisted it was true. Every word. The respect they had shown each other, the partnership they had forged, the love that had sustained them through decades, it was all real, all documented in letters and journals, and the memories of those who had witnessed it. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, and the Wild West became a thing of history, the story of Fletcher and Willa remained relevant. It was a reminder of what was possible when people treated each other with dignity and respect, when love was based on equality and mutual regard rather than possession or control. The physical traces of their lives eventually faded. The original ranch house was eventually replaced, though the new owners kept the old porch posts as a memorial. The barn that had been rebuilt after the fire stood for many more decades before age finally claimed it. Even the headstones slowly weathered, the inscriptions becoming harder to read. But the story lived on, passed down through generations, adapted and retold but never forgotten. It became a touchstone for the family, a reminder of where they had come from and the values they were meant to uphold. When descendants faced hard times, they would remember Fletcher and Willa rebuilding after the fire. When they faced difficult moral choices, they would remember Fletcher refusing to walk away from injustice in St. Louis. When they struggled in their own relationships, they would remember the partnership that had sustained their ancestors through everything life threw at them. In the end, that was their truest legacy. Not land or money or even descendants, important as those were. Their legacy was the example they set, the story they lived, the proof they provided that love and respect and partnership could create something beautiful and lasting. Fletcher Garrison had spent $100 on a hot June day in 1876, not to buy a wife, but to free a woman from bondage. That woman, Willa Jenkins, had become Willa Garrison, his wife and partner in every sense of the word. Together they had built a life, raised a family, and created a love story that would be told for generations. It was a story of hope in the face of despair, of courage in the face of injustice, of love in its truest, most respectful form. It was a story that began with the simple declaration, "You're not property, you're my partner." And it was a story that proved those words could be more than just a promise. They could be a way of life, a foundation for everything good and lasting. In the great tapestry of history, Fletcher and Willa were just two people, unremarkable in many ways. They did not achieve fame or great wealth. They did not change the course of nations or make headlines, but they changed each other's lives, and through that change, they touched countless others. They proved that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could create ripples that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. And so their story endured, a testament to the power of love, the importance of respect, and the beauty of true partnership. In a world that often valued property over people, profit over compassion, Fletcher and Willa had chosen differently. They had chosen each other, chosen respect, chosen love. And in doing so, they had created something that transcended their own time and place, something that spoke to fundamental human truths that never go out of style. Decades after their deaths, if you knew where to look, you could still find traces of them. A faded photograph in a family album showing a serious-faced man with kind eyes standing beside a woman with a determined chin and a gentle smile. A journal entry in cramped handwriting describing the first time Fletcher told Willa he loved her during a thunderstorm. A recipe card in a tin box, Willa's handwriting noting that this particular cake was Fletcher's favorite. A letter from Fletcher to his son James, advising him to always treat his wife as an equal partner, because that was the secret to a happy marriage. These small artifacts, scattered across time, told the story more completely than any grand monument could. They spoke of daily life, of small kindnesses, of enduring love. They showed that the grand romantic gesture in St. Louis had been just the beginning, that the real love story was in the decades that followed, in the quiet moments and daily choices that built a life together. The ranch itself eventually passed out of the family's hands. Economic realities and changing interests meant that by the late 20th century, no garrison was actively working the land their ancestors had settled. But even the new owners knew the story, and they respected it. They kept the small cemetery intact, maintained the headstones, and welcomed descendants who wanted to visit. On the 125th anniversary of that day in St. Louis in 1876, a great-great-grandson of Fletcher and Willa organized a family reunion at the ranch. Dozens of descendants came, some from as far away as California and New York. They gathered on what had been the site of the old house, and the eldest among them, a woman who had heard the story directly from Willa herself as a small child, told it once more. She spoke of a young woman standing in the dust with bound hands, of a cowboy who could not walk away, of $100 that bought freedom instead of bondage. She spoke of a partnership built on respect, of a love that had endured through hardship and joy, of a legacy that reached forward through the generations. And as she spoke, looking at the faces of all those descendants, doctors and teachers, farmers and lawyers, artists and engineers, she saw the living proof of what Fletcher and Willa had built. It was not just about the ranch or the money or even the name. It was about the values they had instilled, the example they had set, the love they had demonstrated. Every person standing there was part of that legacy, carrying forward some piece of Fletcher and Willa into the future. When the old woman finished her story, there was a long moment of silence. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding, not just for the story but for the people who had lived it, for the courage and love and commitment they had shown. It was a moment of connection across time, the living honoring the dead, the present acknowledging the debt owed to the past. That night, as the family gathered for a meal, there was laughter and storytelling, the sharing of memories and the forging of new connections. Cousins who had never met discovered shared traits and interests. Family resemblances were noted and marveled over. And through it all, the story of Fletcher and Willa bound them together, a common heritage they all shared. One of the youngest descendants, a girl of about 10, asked her grandmother why the story mattered so much. Why did they keep telling it, generation after generation? Her grandmother thought for a moment before answering. Because it reminds us who we are and who we should strive to be. Because it shows us that love is about respect and partnership, not possession. Because it proves that one person doing the right thing can change not just their own life, but the lives of everyone who comes after them. Because it's true, and truth is always worth preserving. The little girl nodded, satisfied with this answer, and her grandmother knew that someday she would tell the story to her own children and grandchildren. The legacy would continue. As the reunion ended and people returned to their scattered lives across the country, they carried the story with them. They told it to spouses and children, to friends and colleagues. They used it as inspiration in their own relationships, as a reminder of what love should look like, as proof that doing the right thing matters even when it is hard. And somewhere, if such things exist beyond the physical world, perhaps Fletcher and Willa knew. Perhaps they saw how their love had multiplied and spread, touching lives they could never have imagined. Perhaps they smiled at each other, those same smiles that had lit up their faces decades ago on a porch in Missouri, and knew that they had done well. They had loved truly and honestly, they had built something lasting, and they had left the world better than they found it. That, in the end, was what mattered. Not wealth or fame or power, but love and respect and the courage to do what was right. Fletcher and Willa had understood that from the beginning, from that moment in St. Louis when he had declared her not property but partner. They had lived those values every day of their lives together, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that would never die. The story of she was sold by her stepfather, and the cowboy said, "You're not property. You're my partner," was more than just a romantic tale from the Wild West. It was a truth, lived and breathed and demonstrated through decades of faithful partnership. It was a reminder of what humans were capable of at their best: compassion, courage, respect, and enduring love. And as long as there were people to tell the story, to remember the names Fletcher Garrison and Willa Jenkins Garrison, to honor the choices they made and the life they built, that legacy would continue. It would inspire new generations to treat each other with dignity, to see partnership rather than possession, to choose love that uplifts and respects rather than controls and diminishes. In a small cemetery on a hill in Missouri, 2 headstones stood side by side, weathered but enduring. Fletcher and Willa, together in death as they had been in life. And though their bodies had long since returned to the earth, their love remained, immortal and true, a beacon shining across the years for all who sought proof that real, lasting love was possible. The sun set over the ranch one more time, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and golds. The land they had worked was still beautiful, still productive, still home to life and hope and possibility. And in that sunset, in that enduring beauty, their story lived on, eternal and true, a testament to the power of love, the importance of respect, and the courage to do what is right no matter the cost.